Hi, my name is Maria Tahir. I was born in the US, but it did happen abroad in India. And it happened when I was 7. And my family used to go to India every other summer. So we weren't taken with the intention of going to have it done. There is something called vacation cutting, which I really hate that term because it's not necessarily always accurate, but sometimes women or girls are taken to another country to have it done, or that it's performed in another country. And so in my case, what happened to me falls under the idea of vacation cutting, but I wasn't taken to India with the intention of having it done there too. I just remember that I felt something sharp and I cried, and my mother tried to comfort me. I do have a picture in my mind of my mom comforting me and really wanting to make sure I was okay. In the Bora community, it's generally around 7 or maybe a little bit older. But in general, FGC around the world happens at different ages according to community. It unfortunately can happen as young as, infancy to adolescence and to even adult women. I've had stories of women who've married into certain communities and have had to undergone it too. And the only reason, I thought otherwise about it was because I had a friend who grew up in the same community with me in California, and she was very upset about having undergone it. And she was the one who, for the first time, used the words female genital mutilation, because I didn't know it as that. I knew it as something called katna, which and many communities use different terms for it, and so that's what I knew it as. But when my friend used the term female genital mutilation, that got me thinking about what it was that had actually happened. I remember the conversation in terms of her reaction, and I remember that was the moment where I started connecting the dots and then wondering about it. But I don't get a sense that I felt as angry as she did. Like, my reaction was just really trying to understand what happened. And if it had an impact. I never felt intense anger towards my mom, which many women do, and completely valid and completely right to do. But for me, I wanted to understand it to better. So when I was in social work school for my thesis, I decided that I would do a study to understand why it continued in the United States and within the Indian Bora community, which is the community I grew up in, because there was really no research about it happening in the US to US women and girls. And then also there was really no research out there that had happened from Indian communities. All the research that I could find at the time was really connected it to happening within Africa or amongst African diaspora communities. I actually heard many reasons for why it was given. Some people would tell me it was done to control sexuality, because women were not supposed to be asexual. Other people would tell me, no, it's more religious. Others would say just tradition. Some people actually told me increasing sexuality, and that's why it's done in the Bora community. And then I also hear that it's because it's for hygiene and health reasons. But I heard so many different reasons, and that really just built in my head that this is a social norm, and it's something that over generations has been justified. The male members in my family had no idea that this happened, including my father. He wasn't aware it existed at all in the community. And he had sisters who had all undergone it, but it was something that was just kept hidden until he had a daughter. And I don't really know the specifics about how he found out or when he found out, but it was something. And I've been, it's hard to have those conversations, but him not being aware was not shocking, because that's something that I had heard from many men in the community, that they just had no idea that this continued, which speaks to how secretive it is within the Bora community, and how secretive or how much it's held as something that needs to be just a woman's issue, so you don't talk about it. It's changing now. I was just on a call with some men who want to help try to create sort of a male ally group to help create awareness and education on this issue too. But that's just something in the last 10 years that has really changed in terms of men knowing this, but before it was not true. And I say that in terms of also it varies from community to community in terms of if men know. Some communities, men are aware of this, but very much also buy into the belief that women have to undergo it and that it's something that it's done for marriageability. However, as more attention has gotten on this issue, it has forced the religious leaders within this community to also publicly speak about this issue. And you have been hearing in the wider community that this idea of controlling sexuality is wrong. That was never the reason for it. What is now being promoted by those who promote female genital cutting still is that it is a religious requirement. It is within our, there's a book specific to the Dawdi Boras called the Daim al-Islam, which is a book of Islamic jurisprudence. And within that, it says that women have to undergo this. So it is something that is connected to religion, never connected to sexuality, and that it's done for kind of this spiritual, hygienic kind of purpose as well. So you're seeing in many countries it being done by healthcare professionals versus being done by traditional cutters who are not trained in any medical knowledge. But the idea is that if you perform this under the guise of like a health setting, it's safer. And so it's justified as like, it's okay to do again. I remember visiting a nurse practitioner once and going to the gynecologist's office and just very nonchalantly asking them or telling them that I had undergone this and I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. And I remember the look on her face. The nurse, I think it was the nurse practitioner's face. And she just very much like looked terrified. And that actually was not helpful for me. It made me feel very much like I can never tell anyone that this happened to me, which isn't helpful for any survivor who wants to try to connect with health professionals. And is another reason why I ended up doing research years later, because I recognize that we need to have healthcare providers understand how to work with women if they come to see them. But in my case, I do know that they said that they couldn't tell if anything had happened. So there's no physical distinction for me. So I felt fortunate in that situation, but at the same time, I still don't know if there are, I don't know any difference. So I don't know if, there are other certain emotional, psychological, or sexual negative. I'm a writer, so I wrote my story because I felt like I could have control over it. But it took me a very long time to be okay with being on video and actually talking about this. And it was partly because I didn't want to be labeled as just a victim. And I think it's more complex than that. I don't think what happened to me should have happened. And I think very much that it's a human rights violation. Also, I was really worried about what would happen to my family because they are involved, certain members in the community. And I didn't want them to have negative, social repercussions because of what I was doing. And unfortunately, there have been some, and we've had to talk about them. And that's another reason why people don't speak up, is because even if it won't affect them personally, it affects their family members. And we've had many instances at my organization where we've had women who want to take part or support and initially do, and then they let us know they have to step away because something has happened to a family member, whether it's just kind of threats. I have been fortunate that I have not received any type of threats that feel like my life is in danger. I know other advocates in this area and friends of mine, not from the Bora community, but from other communities that have. So it's and because I know that, I know that I have to be cognizant of that and just cautious of that. So I'm not as active in the community in terms of going to the mosque, but I have received via social media a lot of trolling and a lot of just negative comments and things that have for a long time really just emotionally wore me down, and really saying you're disgracing the community, how could you share this, you're disgracing your parents, and just it's really hard to read. But it's also this idea that somebody once told me you can love your community, but you don't have to agree with everything. And you might want to work on that community and strengthen it and make it better. And I remember I had this whole dilemma in myself in terms of, am I actually unintentionally creating more harm for the Muslim community by bringing this up? And, it's a false stereotype that it only happens within Muslim communities. We know it happens within Christian communities. We know it happens within many other communities globally too. But it was another thing that I had to weigh. It was just like, do you speak up to talk about this human rights violation? And does that cause greater harm to a community that's already being ostracized? And I do remember that, there was a case where a legislator, I think, used female genital cutting in the US as a way to try to pass an anti-Sharia law, which had nothing to do with it, but they tried to make that connection. But it feels like what I learned in that moment is just that no matter what I do when I speak about this, unfortunately, there's just going to be backlash coming from all sorts of people, and you're not going to be able to reach everybody. And you have to learn to be okay with it, and you're going to have to learn that what you share is going to be twisted in all sorts of ways, which is unfortunate. And it's so hard for survivors, any form of gender-based violence, to speak up. But that's the reality too, is that when you do speak up, you just get attacked in all these different ways. And that was my lesson that I had to learn then too. It's a shitty lesson, sorry, but to learn. I mean, my own relationship with the community, it's very complex for a lot of different reasons, but there's a reason why I don't identify as being religiously Bora, because I just don't. I was in college, and for my undergrad, I was a religious studies major. I love religion, and I think it's very fascinating, and I understand, the power and how much peace it can give people as well. But I also see how it can cause strife, and it can cause, conflict, which it has throughout history. And I think one of the reasons why I was a religious studies major was probably because I was questioning my own things and the religion that I was being brought up in. It's amazing how many survivors are speaking up now. That is just amazing to see. And I think in part is because social media advocacy and social media distribution. So I'm a co-founder of an organization called SEO, and we do a lot of work with storytelling and helping women to heal through sharing their stories in various different programs. And we've seen a lot of common elements, but we've also seen differences with their stories. One of the things that I hear a lot of the times, what I hear are women were not told what they were going to undergo. And unfortunately, they were taken by a trusted member, someone they trusted, and then they underwent this. Some women have very vivid, traumatic, strong memories of this and feeling like they lost trust in people and it was hard for them afterwards. Other women have blocked it out completely, which is actually a form of amongst children, it's a way to deal with trauma, to really black out and not remember it. If you look at the span of religions and cultures across the world, fortunately, there are harmful practices found in every single one, from child marriage to certain communities I know within the US that don't believe in vaccination or in giving children medical attention, like medical care. And that's harmful in itself too. And that's not, even though it might be considered a religious duty, that's something that should not be allowed because it does produce harm to children. So I think we have to realize that anything that is harmful can't be justified through culture or religion. And it's a tricky balance, but I do think we have to make a stand on that too.